Susan said she was excited and couldn't wait to hear Allie sing this morning, and now I know why. That was beautiful. Thank you. This week is one of those that has been kind of entertaining, especially Thursday morning here at the church. You all know that we are in the process of getting ready to put the new roof on the education building, new heating systems and stuff to repair leaks and faulty equipment. So one of the things that we've had is we have, thank goodness it's working today, Spectrum Internet service, and we had to do that to get enough bandwidth to do what we needed to do here. So in the process of that, we abandoned the 1960 phone line that came into the building through Bell South, AT&T, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so that old line ran from that side of Tate Street over near the bus stop. It ran across the education, top of the education building, and hooked originally to the chimney, which had long since come loose. And then it ran on the other side over to the alleyway, to the street lights that are over there with the power lines that come in, and then runs back to the building. And so Wednesday afternoon, we were a little bit slow. I kept remembering I need to do that because it's just a line in the way as we begin to prepare for that roofing project. And I call them, and they're very nice about coming possibility of taking it down. And so I expected it to be, 2 or 3 weeks. Well, you won't believe, Thursday morning at 8:30 in the morning, thereabouts, guess what? They called. They're on the way. Do you remember Thursday morning? It rained like the dickens. And so he showed up, and I showed up with my raincoat on, which is basically a glorified excuse for a raincoat. And he was there, and he was very nice, and he came out, and he saw what was going on. He said, I don't know, we might have to get the big truck. And I said, well, I mean, we could just run up top and cut it with a pair of wire cutters and drag it over to the side of the road. I said, but I'm afraid to do that. So, I had a way out there. But anyway, so long story short, he wound up leaning the ladder across the way and got rid of that side of it, and it came through. He called another buddy who came over to pull it out of the street because, they wouldn't let me do it. I offered twice. He just looked at me. I get that a lot. And so anyway, then he got it over there, and he came and rang the doorbell, and he says, I can't get it turned loose on top of the building. It had wrapped around the roof hatch at that point. He said, but when y'all get up there and working on it, if you'll call me, I'll come back and get it. I said, the least we can do is get rid of 80 feet of cable. But I wasn't expecting him. But he showed up. It's kind of an inconvenient, non-pleasant, no wonderful idea of a weather day. With all these pretty days and sunshine that we've had, he showed up when I at least expected him and thought nobody in their right mind would do that. But he was wonderful. It's like this passage, this is looking at the end with Thessalonians. It's the end of the book. It's also looking toward the end with Christ's return. And he promises that the return of Christ comes like a thief in the night or like a woman in labor, back before we could set when children were going to be delivered, which they still can't control exactly. Arrival when you least expect it. That's what part of this thing is. You remember 2000, don't you? Well, or late 1999, just before 2000, when the world was going to come to a crashing end, when life that we knew it was going to end, when all the computers were going to go offline and all the power was going to be lost, and we wouldn't have water, and we wouldn't have food, and we wouldn't be able to do anything that I think it was actually predicting 2020 where we are now. But not really. But that was kind of this thing. It was like, the end's coming, you better be ready. I always said, some of you have heard me tell this now, John Hagee wrote a book about the end of the world. My grandfather in his later years was gullible enough to buy it. The world's still here. John Hagee was wrong, continues to be in a lot of ways. And he has my granddad's money, and we have that stupid book somewhere around the estate. But we're still here. I've always said this, that I think people have actually guessed when the end is coming. And I think God says, no, that's not your right to figure out. That's mine, so I'm not doing it then. I don't know exactly. That's my little guess. But the end time is coming. But Christians have been waiting for 2,000 years for the end time to arrive. It's coming. The Scripture is pretty plain. It says that there's some around here talking to those who would gather around Jesus that would not taste death before the end time. Well, there ain't none of them still around. Not alive. Not on earth. Not in their flesh and bones. So I don't know. Sometimes that gets awful confusing. I think part of the gift of faith and the life of faith is the realizing that there are parts of life and our world and the way things are that we can't control. There are things that are outside of our grasp, and us humans, especially us who are privileged American humans, think that we can control pretty much everything and anything at a whim. Perhaps that's why we need faith. To realize that there's something out there bigger than us. There's something out there that's more powerful than us. There's something out there that's greater and more amazing than us. We're not the pinnacle of creation. We're just a part of God's creation. A small little speck. I love those pictures of the universe. You know, it doesn't matter how far they get out in some space shuttle or a satellite or whatever they send out there, some camera. And it takes this picture of the vastness of the universe. And you see all those stars, and you realize that around some of those stars might be other planets that we can't even figure out. And yet, somehow, some way, God takes an interest in me. Wow. How lucky am I that I have the apple of God's eye. And you too. It's not just about me, but all of us. We are part of God's creation, special and blessed that God cares for us and worries about us and looks after us, is concerned with us, promises to care for us both in the here and the now, and in the later and what's to come, and in the meantime. God's present, God cares for us. You know, in the meantime, that's a pretty important segue. You all know that part of my life is set around, and probably yours too, is ordered around the church year. The seasons that come and go. And we're here in the middle of, at the end nearly, of what we call in the church ordinary time. You know, there's names that we give in theological studies and stuff like ordinary time. Well, it sounds like, oh, that's boring. It's just ordinary. Well, this has just been an ordinary year. It's just, no, it's not ordinary. It's not just plain. Ordinary means the order. It just is the markation, the progression. And we're here nearly at the end of next week's Christ the King Sunday, and we begin Advent, a new year. I can't wait. A new year. Luckily, Advent starts 4 weeks or so before the new year in January. But I'm ready for a new year. But part of what life is, part of what we say, part of the church life is those of us who gather, who are gathered, who connect even on the ordinary Sundays, continue to experience and to expect and to understand that Christ shows up in the very ordinary days of life. The good ones and the bad ones. The ones where we get to do everything we want to do and where we can't do anything that we want to do. Christ is there in the midst, never to give up on us. For those of us who stick around during the ordinary days and not just capture the high holy days of Christianity, actually, we continue to experience the goodness of God every day, every week, in the time of life when some folks just have totally forgotten about church, perhaps, or don't feel that it's something to be worried about so much, except for maybe Christmas and Easter, which are two great, wonderful days. I mean, if they're only going to pick two, they pick the right two, to quote Peter Gomes. But there is a gift that's given to us for sticking around in the ordinary times. The Thessalonians back in the day, they were just a small group in a large empire that had, in a city that had really benefited greatly from the Roman rule, from the things that had brought with trade and financial gifts and standing in the world. So for this small group of Christians that are gathered, and Paul writes to them this letter to the Thessalonians, he reminds them to keep fighting, to keep going on, to expect God to show up, and to not give up. I don't know, maybe you need to hear that too. I mean, it's not that different from where we find ourselves today, perhaps. Perhaps in today's Christianity, oftentimes people claim Christianity, but sometimes corrupt the gospel. A warning about religious freedom, but present a narrow view of what religion is. It's got to look like those who are in power. Practice of faith, as long as it doesn't conflict with other things that are coming along. I mean, people really get into church. I always think about folks later in life sometimes when they say, I'm sorry I can't get there. And I'm like, well, you didn't come the rest of your life either. I don't say that, but I think it sometimes. But for the value of the practice of faith, being in the community of faith, supported by one another, is important. Perhaps there's another way. Perhaps there's another way for us to live and to love. This is from Martha Moore Keish, K-E-I-S-H, from Columbia University, Columbia Theological Seminary. She writes, "We are already children of the day. The day of the Lord is not just past or future, but the day in which we already live. The one in which Jesus has already come to expose our persistent patterns of violence and to lead us in a new way of living that refuses to participate in such destruction." I don't know about you, but every once in a while, especially it seems like recently, I've Penny and I go on a walk at night. Most of you know that by now. Penny's my golden retriever. You know, she's 11. She does which she sets the pattern. She sets the time. She sets when we get up. She sets when she eats. She sets whatever she wants to set. She rules my house. But we go on that walk, and sometimes I think in the quiet of the evening, am I missing it? Have I just completely missed it? Am I not thinking the way I ought to think as a Christian and as a person, as another human being? To care for one another, to care about people? I mean, in today's culture, I'll say it again, you know, it's so important to keep distance. Glenn came in this morning, I said, "Hey Glenn," and I really want to stick my hand out and shake it because that's what I've always done. But I pulled it back. I know I can't. It's not because I don't want to shake Glenn's hand. It's because it's the best thing to do. It's the safest thing to do. It's the safest thing to do for right now, to wear our mask and to keep distance. To not get to do everything we want to do as people because we care about one another. But I wonder, when Penny and I are walking in my neighborhood, have I missed something? Folks don't want to care about other people. As simple as it gets, just to wear a mask. But there are other things. I think about how privileged I am and how much I've been given and how much I have. Some days I feel like the walls of my house are closing in because I need stuff. And yet, I hold that intention with the world around me. How do I reach out? How do I share God's love with other people? Now, I'm still working on it. I'm not perfect. But I need to know that light, that's Christ, that lives within our world, who lives within me and lives within you. And that we're to be beacons of the light for the world around us. No. I wonder sometimes. living as people of the light, we need to have the courage to be sure that we're not living as people of the darkness. Thessalonians says for us to put on the breastplate of faith, put on the helmet. It's not saying be nice to people or not make them mad. It's saying be ready to go to war. I don't think violence is the answer ever. But I think to be ready as a soldier. I think that's really what this whole passage is saying about the whole drunkenness. It's about being alert, being ready to face the challenge, being ready to stand up for the light in the world, to be clear-headed and alert, ready to go into the world. This whole text is really interesting. I think one of the commentators pointed out that Thessalonians 4 is really about the end time, what it might look like. But this verse kind of resonated with this in light of this text and where I am, maybe perhaps you too, from 4:13. So you might not grieve as others do who have no hope. So you might not grieve as others do who have no hope. The hope that we have, the light of Christ, we claim this Christian way of life. We claim the work of Christ in the world, His way of loving and living, being at peace one with another, to challenge the world around us and to know that God who reigns triumphant, reigns in our hearts and in our lives and ultimately in our world despite what the world says to us. All glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.